Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we are specifically going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, the historic new film. I was really shocked to see this. People were laughing and saying that this was not historic. We talk about tabletop role-playing games on this channel, and if you're here, you are certainly deep in the weeds on tabletop role-playing games. This is an historic event. There's no two ways about it. Anybody who's not acknowledging that is really not being fair. So today, oh, by the way, zero spoilers for Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. What I want to talk about today with Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves is the numbers. The numbers are astounding. And so I want to say I'm a numbers guy. It's kind of interesting. There's some people who I care about who have degrees in math, and I mean degrees where you would understand imaginary numbers. It's not a joke. It's real, like extremely high end math, right? So I'm a practical math guy. I can keep my I know an Excel formula or two. I know how to use pivot tables. I know about aggregation and concatenation, and but the reality is when it comes to math, there's really high ends of it, right? But the reality is, math is an incredibly important filter in life, and and these numbers mean something. So let's start talking about these numbers, right? So first of all, Dungeons & Dragons: Honor Among Thieves is a very real film. It cost its budget to create the film, just given to the actors, the actresses, the production team, the directors, the writers. This doesn't include promotion, right? Was $150 million put up by and actually gathered together by Paramount, right, to make this film. This is a real Hollywood production, and when I say it's historic, that is historic. Not only is this Dungeons & Dragons' second attempt at a cinematic universe, no other game in the entirety of all tabletop role-playing games. So Dungeons & Dragons is having its second attempt at a cinematic universe before any other game in the entire industry has had one. Right? That is astounding, right? And this is why I get frustrated when I talk about the OSRs and the indies. They like to point fingers and they like to mock, but the reality is Dungeons & Dragons is setting a bar of quality that is so high that not a single company in the OSR and the indies has been even able to acknowledge the level of quality that Hasbro is calling them to, right? And Hasbro is saying, hey, if you have a tabletop role-playing game, you're going to have non-player characters. You're going to have incredibly you're going to have player characters, and these should be celebrated, and they should be shared on the small screen and on the big screen. And not a single other tabletop role-playing game company in the world has ever been able to do what Dungeons & Dragons is doing this Friday for the second time. It is a huge deal, okay? So this movie costs $150 million. What else costs $150 million? D&D Beyond, right? And so D&D Beyond is no longer a small thing. It is a new level of quality that, again, is absolutely unmatched anywhere in the world by any tabletop role-playing game company. And this is what really frustrates the bahoogles out of me, right? Is there are people in the OSR and the indies who point their finger every day and castigate D&D and say you're doing it wrong, when there are not a single TTRPG company in the world that has accomplished what they've accomplished. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves cost $150 million. Last year, D&D Beyond was bought for $145, let's call it 150, $150 million, right? And basically, one of the things I'm using D&D Beyond far more extensively than I ever had before. And I will say right now, I don't consider a physical D&D canon hardback as a D&D canon book anymore, right? So, and the reason why is I am now with the D&D canon PhysiDig, the physical book and the digital book, so that I have a historical record of what happened at the point of release, because that book is not only a functioning campaign tool and session tool, it is also a historical record of what happened in the print history of Dungeons and Dragons, which is one of the most important print histories in all of humanity. Right? There are very few books that are going to be there are fewer and fewer books printed all the time. Right? The reality is, print is dying. So what is print being used for? It's being used for sacred texts. It's used for tabletop role-playing games because they really excel with a print model, and it's being used for comic books and manga, right? And that's about it. That's like, and textbooks. I'm sorry, they are still printing some textbooks, right? But in textbooks are massively reducing, right? And so the reality is these D&D canon Fizzy-Diges, these physical and digital bundled books. So I have the record of what happened for D&D history, but I also have the digital, so that when I do not have my physical library with me, I never am without access to a book, so I can answer any question I have because I always have my phone with me, right? It's really important. And this is a massive progression, right? And this is what I'm telling you, right? I don't just squawk at you and say, "Oh, I like D&D. It's my favorite game and it's a toy I enjoy." No, I'm telling you, D&D is driving quality for the entire industry, and not by a small amount. I mean by leaps and bounds beyond. And it is outrageously galling that a company that is setting the standard for so my book is a beautifully, staggeringly beautiful art book written by the most innovative tabletop role-playing game designers in the world, right? Done by teams who are establishing layout in D&D canon hardbacks that is then copied across the industry, right? And there are a few, I'll grant it, like Morkborg, right? Those guys crushed it. They did something innovative and new that D&D had never done, right? And they deserve the accolades they received for bushwhacking in the area of layout, right? But across the board, like you see it in D now, you'll see it in OSR and indie products 2-3 years from now, right? And they're on the bleeding edge. They pay for that, right? And so it is just outrageously galling that Dungeons & Dragons is making every single game you play better. And the same people who are making those games that are being made better by Dungeons & Dragons are pointing the finger and saying, "You guys don't know how to do it," right? We're light years behind you in presentation. We're still putting out crap PDFs, right? D&D is available on cells interlinked, massively, technologically powerful, continuing to advance, right? Digital platform. Dungeons & Dragons content is an interlinked digital platform that costs $150 million. And if you're some scrub OSR and scrub indie still publishing PDFs, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of your product, right? And instead you collect your ennies while people put their nose up at D&D. D&D doesn't just make good books. They raise the bar and set the standard for the entire industry, right? Let's talk about something else, right? Chris Pine, okay? This guy's a real Hollywood actor, and he was paid $11.5. This was widely reported. I don't think it's been confirmed. It was reported by Grace Randolph and multiple other outlets that he was paid $11.5 million for taking the lead role in this, right? That is huge. That is like those kind of numbers, right? Let me explain this to you. The last number we had for the gross revenue, right, of Paizo, who is Dungeons & Dragons' #1 competitor in the world right now. In 2019, the entire company, their revenue, their gross, right, was, their gross revenue was $25 million. One actor was paid almost half the sum of the entire annual gross revenue of D&D's main competitor, right? When I say that D&D is the thing, it is that it is special and it does not function or compete like any other tabletop role-playing game in the world, These numbers are astounding. They are astounding. And it is outrageous that these same OSR and indies that are getting absolutely crushed, their numbers are crushed by D&D, right? They bring nothing to the table on innovate. Every now and then, one of them pokes up like Morkborg and does something special. FFG created narrative dice. That was a real innovation, right? But generally, the OSRs and the indies are just watching D&D, seeing the level of quality they achieve, copying it 1, 2, 3 years later, and then having the galling audacity. One of the worst offenders on this is Ghostfire Games. That terrible, terrible company that just puts out junk product, right? Comparatively, literally insults D&D every single week on their podcast and laugh at them and castigate them, right? And put their nose up to a company that literally has surpassed them on 50 different levels, right? So these numbers are real. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves cost $150 million. That is a very real number. It is a very real accomplishment. This is a historical event you will witness this weekend, right? And a huge amount of time, focus, and energy went into this. And I'm just so frustrated at the TTRPG community that based on no accomplishments, they continue to belittle Hasbro, which has been a better guardian for D&D than any TTRPG has ever guardianed any other game. And that's not an opinion, that is a hard fact, right? Like, D&D Beyond is unmatched anywhere in the industry. A second attempt at a D&D cinematic universe surpasses every other tabletop role-playing game company in the world. There's no room for laughter. There's no room for finger pointing, and it still continues. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.